What is the most used man-made material on Earth? You guessed right, it's concrete. Look around. It's everywhere. Sidewalks, driveways, foundations, floors you stand on, and even entire buildings are made out of concrete. So why don't we discuss it more? In each episode of Concrete Logic, we will explore one concrete-related topic with the help from industry professionals that are shaping the future of the trade. We'll talk with suppliers, contractors, architects, engineers, specialists, and even some proponents of competing materials about their views of concrete and their vision of its future. And welcome to another episode of the Concrete Logic podcast. And today I have Cian Brennan with me. Cian, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Seth. Yeah, I'm the CEO of a company called Quantum Contract Solutions. So started off in Australia, New Zealand. We're in Texas, across the States, and in Canada now as well. And what we do is essentially we help construction companies with the money side of construction, if that makes sense. So anything contractual, anything with getting paid, anything with not getting paid, getting variations, negotiating change orders, extensions of time, negotiating your contract, what's in your contract, anything from that contractual side of the business that so many construction companies kind of, either give to their project managers to do on the side of their day-to-day jobs. And that's kind of where we fit in. So that's really our expertise. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So normally on the podcast, we like talking about concrete and all the technical side of things. And we like the chemistry of concrete. We talk about that a lot. But you're the first guest we've had on that we're going to talk about the legalese of it all, because everybody that does concrete work normally signs a contract, and we should be reading what we're signing before we sign. And Cian's, that's your expertise. So Cian, can we take a global look at the clients you work with, folks that you help? What do you see across the board, just issues that sub-trades or subcontractors have with contracts?
Well, if we look at it, from a systemic issue, and there's a lot of insolvencies going on in the world at the moment, and there's a lot of various different reasons for that, which we can go into as well. Material-wise and getting people and inflation. And the contract can protect you from all of those things if you've negotiated it into your contract. And again, it can really, really damage you and put you out of business if you haven't. But really the main issue, and it's in particular to subcontractors, is understanding the contractual hierarchy. Okay, so top of the food chain, you've got oil and gas companies, mining companies, you've got the government, you've got developers. Who else you got? The guys who want to build things, right? At the end of the day, they want the end asset built. And then you've got your GCs, right? Now, the thing about the GCs, interestingly, is they do very little construction work. More often than not, they don't do any construction work. So really, they're a finance company, because what they'll do is they'll get a loan from the bank, they'll win the contract, and they'll subcontract out all of the work, and they'll make money on the delta between the two. That's their business model. And that's pretty risky. And if you're looking in the newspapers at the moment, it's a lot of those main contractors going out of business, or GCs. And because they're over leveraged, and all of a sudden the rates have gone up, and it's costing them a lot of money. So those guys, but the problem when they go out of business, every sub down the line gets impacted because they're not going to get paid, right? So it's a flow down effect. And so in addition to that, and this is where I see the real problem, is that the contract between the principal and the top of the food chain and the GC, they're going to have lawyers on both sides of the table, and they're going to agree a contract that they're both happy with. But the GC, knowing that they're now a finance company, knowing that they're making money on the delta, and knowing that wherever they can save money and move risk around is going to be to their benefit, is going to send a contract to the subcontractor, and it's going to be super hostile. It's going to be, all of the risk is going to be pushed onto the subcontractor. And so I think we can all know that happens. And so if you look at the actual economics of the whole thing, the worst contract in the whole chain goes to the guy that hasn't got the resources to deal with it. And so you're asking a concreter, for you guys, for a concreting company, to sign this particularly harsh contract, that when something goes wrong, it goes very wrong. And that is probably the systemic issue in the construction industry, where so many subcontractors actually don't understand how to negotiate, and they don't understand what to negotiate either.
Yeah, so you don't have to sign what you're first sent. You're like, you shouldn't sign it. You should review it and look at the things that are going to bite you, you can't, I guess you can't look at contracts in a way that you're thinking of everything's going to go okay. You got to think of the contract of when things go bad, like you were saying. What happens if things go bad? How can I protect myself? So what things like do you see in contracts that subcontractors should look for that they should be looking to get out of the contract or put into the contract to protect themselves from when things go bad?
Okay, so just before we get into the absolute nitty gritty, there's a couple of things, because I've been through this before with a lot of our clients, and they will think, hey, I can't negotiate this contract. They're just going to give the work to someone else. And so that isn't the case. There's actually a game of contracts going on. And understand the game for the GC is they're giving you their worst possible contract. Their worst possible one that they're giving you is what you got. They have backup clauses for all of the things there, right? And in their company, they have authority to move on those things. So let's just say there's 4 concreting companies bidding for a project. 3 of them try to negotiate, and 1 of them doesn't try to negotiate. They don't look at that one company as easy to deal with, great. They look at that one company as that they don't know what they're doing, right? It doesn't give them confidence. So by actually negotiating and doing it in a way where you look professional, they're like, oh, these guys are switched on. It's not their first rodeo. They know what they're doing. So that concept is really, really important. Yeah. Now, from a risk perspective, sorry, Seth?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just saying that's a very good point, that when you reach back out to them and start asking questions about the contract shows that you kind of know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I challenge you to think, I don't know who the biggest company in your neck of the woods, right, Virginia, like, do you think that they are contractual, right? And the bottom line is that 100% they are, because they know that the returns are in the terms. Okay, so risk is very, very, risk is like a silent killer, right? In that when nothing happens, risk still exists. It just hasn't happened yet. And so there's a lot of very, successful people, Warren Buffett's of the world, and they talk about, applying this to construction. Successful companies in construction have a long-term view. So 5-10 years. They're not looking at next project to next project. They're looking, okay, what over the next 5 or 10 years. And when you negotiate a contract, you're really just reducing your risk. And it's protecting the downside, because, and Warren Buffett has said this, it's all about downside risk. So typically you will continue to grow as a construction company over time. But then there will be a down. There will be a bang in the market. There will be something goes badly wrong on a project. And if you haven't negotiated your contract to reduce your risk, that down is going to be huge and what might wipe you out or set you back 5 or 10 years. You want that down just to be a little dip and then off you go again. And that's the point of negotiating contracts. And that's why it is really, really important to do it. And so each company should have its own set of commercial principles. And that, to go back to your question that you asked me before, what do people negotiate? So it's obviously going to be different for concreting company, scaffolding company, steel fabrication company, because there's different things that matter. And I'm not a concrete expert, but I would say dewatering, water, groundwater, rain, inclement weather, that sort of stuff are issues for you guys, right? Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, that comes up in every job.
Okay, so they're the things that you need to be covered on, right? You got to make sure that if those type of things happen, because they're your risky things, that you have, you're covered in those things. But let me give you just a couple of different examples, right? So the termination clause in a contract is very important, particularly at the moment. And the reason is a lot of contracts that you get from GCs will have different ways that they can terminate you. There'll be termination for convenience, right? I just, we've decided not to go ahead with the job and therefore, we're terminating you. And termination for default, which is essentially you've not done what I've asked you to do and then we're terminating you because you've not done it, which are both are fine, both are fair enough. But the problem in this scenario is when you read the termination clause, there's no way you can terminate them. Silent. It's only ways that they can terminate you, right? So what we want to do is get reciprocal termination so that if they don't pay you, you can go, hey, you've defaulted on the contract and therefore we want to terminate the contract. Because the situation we're finding at the moment is that, so say your GC goes out of business or is having money troubles or whatever and doesn't pay you on time. And say you can't get out, you can't terminate the contract. You're now in, say, month 1, they haven't paid you. And you're like, my cash flow is starting to get hit here. And now I'm going into month 2. Do I really want to continue spending money on guys on site, equipment on site, and I'm not sure I'm going to get paid on month 2? And I'm hearing rumors that the GC is losing money, going out of business. No, you want to be able to get out of the contract. Okay, so you don't want to be trapped in a contract. So that's one example where if you negotiate a reciprocal termination into a contract, then you should be good to go, right? And that's an easy one to negotiate because you'd say to them, hey, you listed all these ways you can terminate me. Surely we can have a reciprocal that if you do something wrong, I can terminate you. And they're like, oh yeah, sure, okay. And then that's one example. That makes sense?
Yeah. And so yeah, determination. You hit the dewatering, which we would call scope of work kind of item. What about so here in Virginia, they just changed the law at the first of the year, and they essentially got rid of paid if paid, paid when paid. That no longer
stuff. Yeah.
no longer applies. So I would say everyone that listens to you got to look at your local laws as far as payment terms and things like that, because you can leverage those laws in your behalf. So that's
so even though when you have paid when paid clauses, so paid when paid is horrendous, right? Because you get absolutely no control over when your client gets paid. Okay, so in most countries around the world that is illegal. I know there's various different states in the US where it is still legal, but what they tend to do as well now, even where it is illegal to have paid when paid, is they do approved when approved. So I'll approve your change order once it's approved up the line. So it still kind of exists, and you're like, well, you've asked me to do the bloody change order and I've gone and done it and spent money and you didn't have approval beforehand. Like, it's still not the best thing, but you can still obviously negotiate around that as well. Yeah.
What about what do you see out there for retainage? That's a big thing we look out for as well. So when you're a sub trade, especially when you're the concrete contractor, usually one of the first trades in and one of the first ones to finish. And there's owners and developers or whoever out there. They like to hold your money throughout till they're moving into the building. What do you see out there? How do you negotiate that?
So you have a contract with the GC, right? You do not have a contract with the principal, the owner,
right?
So you would rely on that, and you would say, okay, so we have a retainer for 10% on every invoice to a maximum of 5%, and we want to get paid our retainer at 50% on completion, and the other 50% after 12 months, which is fair on our contract, not on the project's contract. And that's what you would negotiate. You would negotiate it is just your PC date is when you get your first 50, and your end of your defects liability or the end of your warranty period is when you get your other 50% back. And so that's it. It's essentially negotiating. That's when you get your money back at that time. And obviously negotiating the time retainage is one type of security. Bank guarantees another type of security. Surety bonds is another type. So whatever you prefer to put up as security, you want to make sure it's tied to your own specific contract and not to the head contract.
Yeah. But you were saying that, yes, our contracts typically through a GC, and then the GC is what we would call the prime contractor, and they have a contract with the owner, developer, government agency, whatever. Do you recommend the sub trades to get a copy of that agreement? Because what we see is a lot of flow downs, and you're not aware of those flow downs, the risk that flows down to you. So if you don't know what the GC's agreeing to, then I think you're exposing yourself to unknown risk.
100%, but you got to look at the contract, and if the contract says that the prime contract is, whatever this contract says is reliant on the prime contract, well, then exactly what you said is true. You need to understand what's in the prime contract if they're referencing the prime contract in your contract. What I'm saying, prudent negotiation would be, hey, I don't have a contract with the prime, with the GC. I've got a contract only with you, and I just want to keep everything in this nice little neat contract just with you and not the prime contract. Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, so you're saying look out for those kind of terms in your contract and get those
them out. There'll be one clause that references the prime contract, and that's the one you go, hey, no, we don't want to have anything to do with the prime contract. We just want to make sure that me and you have a contract. We'll do a good job for you, but we don't want to be brought into that level of risk. Right.
Yeah. What other things do you see? I think normally you gotta, I think it's obvious that you gotta look at the scope of work, make sure the list of the scope of work is what you bid on, what you're priced. That's, I think that's obvious to concrete guys. But as far as in the what I would call the main body of the contract that has all the stuff that a normal person that's not a lawyer would understand. I assume, Cian, you spend your life looking at.
So I'm not a lawyer, right? And this is the important thing, right? So I've done contracts my whole life, right? And so I'm not a lawyer. We have lawyers, right? But this is the important thing, right? So you as a concreter, if I gave you an engineering drawing or an architectural drawing, right? So the architect has drafted something, the engineer has drafted something. You could take that drawing and interpret it pretty well. I'm pretty sure, right? Of course you could. There's a third document. There's a fourth document. You got scope of work as well, but the other document you have is the contract that's drafted by a lawyer, and you need to be able to interpret it as well. It's as simple as that. Once you understand how to interpret that contract, honestly, most of the risk and understanding the risk that you're taking on goes away, and you understand how to make more money in post-award. So one of the key things is years ago, I met a CEO of a big mechanical engineering company, and they started off in Ireland. They went to the US, they went to the Middle East, they went to Australia, all oil and gas related. And he said to me, the key to this is for us winning projects, we win projects at a loss, knowing that we had the contractual experience in the post-award phase on change orders to get our margin back and to make money. And so if you can understand the contract to be able to make money in the post-award phase, that's what the big companies do. And if you can have that skill internally to do that, it's definitely worth doing. So if you look at the big companies, the Turners of the world, right, they have teams of contracts people for a reason. So they'd spend, 150, 200 grand a pop on these guys for a reason. And that's why the contract side of it, if you can understand how to use it properly, it'll make you more money at the end of the day.
Yeah, I would. That's a very risky way to approach a contract. I think you can get away with that with maybe like government agency kind of jobs, because they always preach you got to bid the drawings and specs, because they don't want you to, I guess, if you see a gap in the drawings or something's missing that you know. I'm trying to think of a good example, but I can't right now. But essentially, let's just say that you're putting in a concrete slab and there's no reinforcing of any sort, and you know better that there should be reinforcing in it, and you bid the job with no reinforcing, because you know that you were told to bid the drawings and specs, but the drawings were lacking in detail, and then you hit them up with a change order after you get the job and say, hey, you're missing that. I think you can get away with that depending on who the owner is and how how your contract is worded, because the government does that kind of stuff all the time, at least here in the States. But there's something lacking, and people will ask questions, and not everything's caught ahead of time. So contractors will get change orders for that stuff that was missed on the drawings. But I've seen language in contracts before that say, hey, if there's something missing, say there's a discrepancy between the architectural and the structural drawings, you have to include those.
You're the
costs.
Expert. You're the expert, right? You should have picked it up. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's terrible. So that'll be document errors and discrepancies, right?
There
and again,
it is.
That's one that you got to pick up to say, hey, I'm not like, all the time, you're on site, you go to a place and there's something supposed to be there. Right? I don't know. Do you dig your own, if you're doing foundations, do you do excavation as well? You go somewhere, you do. Yep. Okay. But let's just say you didn't, right? For the sake of this argument, you get there and there's nothing dug, right? What can you do? That's not your fault. Right. So, sorry, or that's not the right example. That's basically a different subcontractor. But let's just say you go to an area of site to do some work. Something was supposed to be there already, like a concrete post or a plinth or something, and it's not already there. Well, there's nothing you can do because they've made an error in the design. Right? That's not your fault. The fact that you have to take on that as your fault is the problem, and the way to get rid of that problem is to negotiate in the contract to say that, hey, we're not taking that particular delay on. And to go back to your, that we're not taking on that error, but to go back to what you said about dewatering and like water errors, if you price that into your rates, which is fine, and you even write it in your scope of work, that's okay. But if the terms and conditions say otherwise, that if there is issues, well, then the terms and conditions will take precedence, and then they'll point to that and say, no, we don't have to pay you because the contract says you're supposed to take all of that on board. So again, you got to make sure it's in the terms and conditions more so than even just the scope of work and the rates. Yeah.
So when you say in the terms and conditions, what do you mean by that? Making sure it's in there. Here, and I know you're in Perth, Australia, and you know that, but you also work in the States. So here in the States, normally you see a main body contract and then a scope of work is separate. It's a different exhibit.
Yes.
So what do you see in that main body of the contract that would say, hey, yes, there's an exhibit here that's your scope of work, and it's a list, but it's not necessarily the entire list of what you owe us. What do you see in the main body of contract that could put the subcontractor on the hook for more than what's in that scope of work?
Okay, so just to go back, so the contract is everything, right? So when we're talking about the contract, we're talking about the signing part, the terms and conditions, the scope of work, so all the different exhibits to the contract. So in the terms and conditions, it could say, it often does talk about weather and rain delays. So the rain delay, for example, if it's you agree to take on rain as at your own cost. Okay, the way it'll actually be where there will be no additional cost or time delays for rain. You will have been thought of to have already included that in your rate. And say though in your scope of work or in your rates, you say clearly we have not priced for rain. Well, then the contract will take precedence because there'll be a portion of the documents that at the front of the contract that will lay out the order of precedence, and terms and conditions will come before scope of work, which means if there's ever an argument, they'll point to that and they'll say, hey, that takes precedence, and then therefore we're not paying you for it.
Mm-hmm. Right. All right. What else is out there that you think we should look out for in our contracts on these times that we're going through right now? There's a lot of uneasiness in the world right now.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things. I want to talk a little bit more about the post-award phase, because that's kind of where people are at the moment. People are on projects at the moment, and they're, it's a little bit sticky, and that's where the trouble is coming in. And so we've done, I can't remember the exact figure, but 1,400 disputes or something like that. And the key learning from the disputes is pretty simple. It's a race to see who loses the least amount of money. And so even if you are 100% correct in the dispute, right? So it's like, say you're driving along in your car, Seth, and you stop at the traffic lights and someone rear ends you, right? They get out of the car and they say, hey, Seth, that's completely my fault. Right? And you're like, oh, okay, cool. And you're like, you swap details, I'll get it all sorted for you. And so it's completely his fault. He's taken it on. Okay, this is like a construction dispute that you are totally in the right. The bottom line is you still have to take it to a shop. You still have to get quotes. You still have to talk to an insurance company. You might have to rent a car. Someone has crashed into your car now. So it's not worth the same. When you go to sell it, you have to say it's been crashed if you're a good citizen. And so you're still out of pocket, even if you win. And so that's a construction dispute, in that even if you are 100% in the right, you're still going to come out down a bit. And so the key to a construction dispute, and I know this sounds a bit painfully obvious, is to not get into a construction dispute. In that,
that means don't do any jobs, though, Cian. Every job's got a dispute.
Yes, but what I mean is when the dispute is starting to become a bit of an issue, that's when you need to knock it in the head. And it's worth your while giving some to get rid of the dispute quickly. Because if you get into dispute, you will lose money. So it's worthwhile going, hey, look, yeah, okay, whatever. How about we just agree to, I'll knock 5% off this, 10%, let's just move forward. That is the way to approach a dispute. Because otherwise, the only people winning are lawyers. And, that's, I'm not saying I'm not downing the lawyer profession. They do good work. But if you're in construction, you want to get work done. And the way to do it is to avoid the dispute pretty much at all costs.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think a lot of folks approach disputes or negotiation in as something that somebody's got to come out of that thing feeling hurt, and versus looking at it as how do we both walk away from this thing feeling like it was a fair agreement. So you got to. There's no good guys and bad guys in construction in my book. I think we all have our job to do on each job, and you just got to think of, if I was in that guy's shoes over there, what does he need to succeed? What does he need to look good in front of his boss? And
hey, that's it. Yeah, that's it. And then, how do you make him look good in front of his boss?
That's right. And then, and the same way, how can you look good in front of your boss? By, doing what you need. And that's the kind of conversation you need to be having with folks when you get into those change order situation or dispute, or, versus, hey, that they're trying to screw us over. Kind of situation. That is not fun. I did that early in my career. I was the guy that was looking for a fight all the time. And I found out after a while that is not the way to do business in construction. And it's a lot easier when you're trying to work with everybody versus fighting everybody.
Yeah. So I can give you there's one thing I just want to quickly tell your audience is that the paper you're getting your notices for your change orders and notices for your delays in on time and your contractual paperwork is incredibly important. And a lot of people don't do. A lot of people put it on the project manager to do it as a side hustle to his day job, which is fine. But the project manager is if you're a project manager, right? Don't bite my head off, right? But project managers are great at solving problems. They're on site. They're great at construction. It's very hard to get a project manager to do that and also the contractual work. It's just very, very difficult. It is hard for them physically to do that. But even smaller GCs, because of new technology and everything, have like these pretty robust corporate governance. And so on their side, making the other guy look good, on their side, he's going to have a piece of paper and he's going to turn around to his boss, with I've received this change order, blah, 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 and here's the basis of the argument. And there'll be a box that he needs to tick. Did they comply with the notification provisions? Mm-hmm. And if he can't tick that box, yes, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You're not going to get paid. And so you got to get your paperwork in. You got to figure out a system to do it. And it's very, very important for that particular reason. And then the other thing I wanted to hopefully help your audience with is a bit of a framework for these hostile meetings. And this is something we've developed, and just take it and run with it. So imagine you're in a meeting and it's a pretty tense meeting, right? And it's going to be a tense meeting. It's going to be boiled over. So what we like to do is you go in and obviously you prepare it. Okay. But the first thing you do is you ask them, can you just tell it? Can we just hear your point of view, right? Get them fully speaking. Do not interrupt them whatsoever, even if they say the most outrageous, SH1T, just let them go, right? Let them go, say nothing. And all you need to do in this phase of this is just write it down. And when they've finished talking, right, just go, okay, so here's what I hear you're telling me, and just parrot it back, okay? Then once you got through that phase, it's great. They've felt that you've listened to them. They felt that you heard them. And you, really importantly, you haven't interrupted them. Not interrupting is important, and I'll explain why. Then we want to follow what we call the GROW model, okay? So GROW. So G stands for goal. So you go to them, hey, Seth, okay, I've heard you. Right, look, my goal is I want to keep a really good relationship with you guys, work on site. The goal for this meeting is to come out of here with a bit of resolution, okay? Can we agree on that? That's G. Or is the reality? This is where you bang in with some points. Reality of the situation is we went on to site. We didn't have access to site until this date, this date. This is where you give them your bullet points. Now, the key is this is where they're going to want to jump in and interrupt you. And then you can quickly say to them, hey, oh, sorry, I let you speak in its entirety. Can you please afford me the same courtesy? And then they almost have to, because you did let them speak. That's why it was so important not to interrupt them. And so they go, okay, fair enough. So then you go through all of your points and they haven't cut you off. You're able to say everything in a nice, calm, professional manner. And then O is for GRO. O is for options. So you give them options. You give them one pretty good option, right? You want an option that you want them to take. That's reasonable. You give them a pretty horrendous option, right? Well, option one, let's just go straight to court, right? Let's just blow this all off. Let's all spend $100,000 and go to court, right? Option two, we're willing to give you like a 5% discount here, and let's just move on and whatever, and then maybe a third option. And then the bottom one is you go, the W is for way forward, and you go, well, what's the way forward you guys would like? And so you ask them to make the decision, but in reality, you've controlled the whole narrative. You've given them the options, and then they go, oh, well, option two seems like pretty realistic and seems fair. You seem reasonable. And then like you're in a really good negotiation, and hopefully you can nut something out. So that's a framework that we use a lot, and it's pretty effective.
That is awesome. That last minute and a half was awesome. Yeah, that is a great approach, because I've been in both types of meetings. I've been in the one where like you said, you have someone in the meeting and they're like, ask the client to tell their side of the story. And then you have a superintendent or foreman level person in that meeting. And anytime they hear someone, your client, say something that may or may not be true, they got to jump in and say, hey, no, that's not what happened. And it just kills the meeting. It kills the mood of the meeting. And they're, like you said, the rest of the dispute or negotiation is just gonna turn to the worst.
You start arguing over little things, and it's little things, and you just want to get to the big thing, right? Which my big thing is, I'm going to give you 5% off $100,000. I don't want to talk about this $2,000 thing that you guys had a bit of an argument about,
Yeah, no, that is awesome advice. I think we could end on that one. If there's, is there anything else, Cian, that you wanted to hit on before we end for today?
No, just I guess if you got listeners right there, I've got a podcast called Construction Secrets, and that's just basically free help contractually. If there's anything, with our own clients, if something happens negatively, I'll do a podcast and I'll say, hey, this thing happened and here's what was wrong and here's how we could have avoided it. And so essentially just by listening to the podcast, you get contractually savvy over time. You understand the contractual or the money side of things, as we like to call it.
Yeah. And I'll put your contact information in our show notes so people can reach out to you, because we connected on LinkedIn, obviously. And so that's a good way to get a hold of Cian. And we'll put all his contact info so you guys can reach out. Hopefully you're going to reach out to him before you get into the dispute is ideal, right, Cian? Or do you want
That's it. Before you get into dispute, never happens, to be honest, but before you get into dispute, that is one of the key things though, actually, is have it, because a lot of times you got a project manager on site. And then he's going to come to you back at the office and he's like, I'm sorry, I'm in a hole here, right? I'm already in trouble. Or if you have like in-house legal, and by the time you go to that person, it's too late. They need to have come to you at the start to say, my opposing project manager says he's not going to pay me for this thing. What do I need to do? Then you got like essentially try and find out 3 sides of the story. Story 1, what's your side of the story? Story 2, what's their side of the story about you? And then story 3 is, what does the contract say? Based on that, put a strategy together before you get into the dispute. You get into the dispute and you're contractually in a bad position, excuse my French, you may as well just bend over.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for coming on the podcast. We'll have to bring you back on and maybe we can trade war stories on the worst.
I'd love that.
Worst jobs.
That'd be good.
You got to let time go a little bit. You can't talk about something that's fresh. You got to let time, I think, get between you and maybe a bad job.
Yeah, 100%, Seth. 100%. It was really, really nice chatting to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Cian. I appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Concrete Logic Podcast. If you'd like to support the show, please visit our website, concretelogicpodcast.com, and click on the show support link. We welcome any amount you can provide. Your support enables us to continue to produce shows commercial-free and free of censorship. As we bring another episode to a close, let's enjoy some sweet tunes by the one and only Mike Dutton.
That alarm always sings couple hours before the sun comes up. Open up the side, put some diesel in the lights and wait till the trucks roll up. Yeah, this ain't how most folks live their lives, dripping in sweat, working overtime, but while they're tying their ties for the